The morning broke with a pale and sickly light, casting long shadows over what remained of Greenwood. The village had been a humble place, a scatter of pine-board houses, a church with a leaning steeple, a storehouse with its roof sagging from years of storms. Now it was a skeleton. Walls stood half-burned, timbers cracked and smoldering, the air thick with the bitter tang of charred grain and tar. The ground was littered with broken crockery, the twisted iron of wagon wheels, and here and there a blackened boot or a child's toy, abandoned in haste. Private Thomas Ellery stepped over a fallen beam, his musket resting on his shoulder, the strap cutting into his coat where sweat had stiffened the wool. Around him, the other militiamen moved in silence, shadows among shadows. Their breath came in pale clouds against the dawn chill. No birds sang. Even the crows had abandoned the place. "God help us," muttered Sergeant Nathaniel Cole beside him, pulling his scarf tighter against the cold. "If this is the fate of every village, there'll be nothing left to fight for." Ellery did not answer. He felt the words lodge somewhere deep, heavy as a stone in his gut. He had a wife in Georgetown, a son barely old enough to walk. He had promised them he would fight to keep the war from their doorstep. But as he stared at the blackened husks of Greenwood, that promise felt like a lie wrapped in a uniform. A shutter creaked in the wind, swinging from a single rusted hinge. Somewhere in the ruins, a dog whined, thin and pitiful. The British dragoons had ridden through the night before, leaving ruin in their wake. A warning, perhaps, or simply sport. The men gathered in what had once been the village square. Now it was only a patch of open ground, littered with ash and the skeletal remains of a church bell that had fallen from its tower. Captain Elias Hargrove stood before them, his coat stiff with soot, his eyes bloodshot from smoke and sleeplessness. "Listen well," he began, his voice carrying through the damp morning fog. "The war does not wait for pity. A Loyalist supply column moves along the Santee, bound for Camden. If it reaches their garrison, they will tighten the noose around every patriot in this backcountry. We intercept them, or we wither like this village." A low murmur rippled through the ranks. Their powder was low, their bellies emptier still. They had marched for weeks on salted pork and green corn, drinking swamp water gone foul in the heat. Yet no one spoke of turning back. To return empty-handed was to face the wrath of both their neighbors and their own starving families. Cole spat into the dirt. "And if they have cavalry, sir?" Hargrove met his gaze without blinking. "Then we take what we can and vanish into the trees. They cannot guard every road. We make them bleed in a dozen places until they cannot tell where to strike." It was the only strategy left to men like them: hit and run, harass and disappear. This was not the war the northern states fought with regiments in bright coats. This was the Carolina War: smoke, swamp, and sudden death. Ellery drifted from the square when the orders were done. His boots stirred the pale ash that clung to the fields like a late frost. He came upon a farmhouse, its frame charred and crooked, the roof gone to cinders. Inside, the hearth was still warm, a smear of soot running up the chimney like a scar. On the floor lay a wooden horse, one wheel scorched away, its painted face blackened by fire. He crouched, fingertips brushing the toy, and for a moment the weight of the war pressed on him with all its cold fingers. "Will this all be worth it?" he whispered, his voice barely louder than the crackle of the dying embers. There was no answer, only the distant cry of a hawk circling above the barren fields. He straightened, adjusted the strap of his musket, and turned back toward the waiting column. Somewhere, deep in his coat, was a scrap of parchment, a letter half-written to his wife, the words smudged where rain had seeped through. He had begun it with hope. Now he wasn't sure how to finish. By afternoon, the smoke of Greenwood was already a smudge on the horizon. The Patriot militia rode out in pairs, their silhouettes stretching long against the dying sun. No drums, no banners, only the creak of leather and the muted clink of iron. They left behind the ruins, the smell of burned cornfields, and the hollow promise that they would return. Ellery glanced back once, the wind stirring the ash into brief, ghostly shapes that danced along the empty street. For an instant, he thought he saw figures there, women with shawls over their heads, children clutching empty pails. But when he blinked, the street was bare. The war had many fronts: the battlefield, the homestead, the heart, and in all three the ground was burning. The sun had bled itself into the horizon when the column slipped into the forest. The pines stood tall and close, their trunks black silhouettes against the bruised sky. Resin scented the air, mingling with the damp smell of the riverlands ahead. Crickets screamed their chorus, and in the thick Carolina twilight, even the owls seemed to wait, silent. Thomas Ellery marched in the second rank, his musket barrel glinting faintly in the dim. The ground was soft with fallen needles, swallowing the sound of their boots, but every snapping twig still made hearts jolt. "Keep your steps light," Sergeant Cole whispered as he passed down the line. "The swamps carry sound farther than the wind." Ellery nodded. He felt the weight of the letter in his pocket, the one he had not finished. Perhaps he would find a moment tonight, if they camped at all. His fingers itched to write, not because words would change anything, but because silence was heavier. Somewhere far behind them, the ruins of Greenwood still smoked. Somewhere ahead, the Loyalist convoy crept along the Santee, its wagons fat with powder, bread, and rum. To capture it meant another month of fighting. To fail, starvation, retreat, perhaps the gallows. They made camp well past midnight in a clearing where the trees parted enough for starlight to fall. No great fire was lit, only a low, guttering flame, shielded by their coats, more ember than blaze. The men huddled close, their breath ghosting in the cold air. Captain Hargrove unfolded a map on a tree stump, smoothing its creased surface with a scarred hand. His finger traced the black ribbon of the river. "Here," he murmured, voice low, "at the ford by Mills Crossing. They'll stop to water the horses before dawn. We strike then, quick, silent, hard. Take their powder, burn their wagons, and melt away before their riders know which way to chase." Cole spat into the needles. "And if they've got more men than we think? And we give them ghosts to chase?" Hargrove replied without looking up. Around the circle, heads nodded slowly. Hunger made them brave. Hunger also made them cruel. Ellery pulled the parchment from his coat. The ink was blurred from a rain 2 nights past, but he set the point of his quill to the page all the same. "Dear Mary," he whispered as he wrote, "the woods here do not sleep. Every rustle is an enemy. Every shadow a rifle raised. I fear I've begun to forget the sound of our boys' laugh." The words wavered. He held the page close to the embers, watching the smoke curl at its edges, then folded it again and pressed it to his chest. Dawn bled into the river mist, turning the water a coppery red. The ford at Mills Crossing lay shallow and still, fringed by reeds and ghostly fog. The Loyalist column came just as the captain had said. 2 wagons, heavy with tarred barrels, a dozen mounted riders, a clutch of weary footmen marching knee-deep through the water. Hargrove raised his hand. Muskets lifted. Bayonets caught the pale light. Breath froze in throats. Then, the crack of a branch, a startled horse's whinny, and the spell broke. A single shot rang out, echoing like a thunderclap between the trees. A Loyalist rider pitched backward, his mount screaming. Chaos rippled through the ford. Shouts, splashing, the frantic heave of reins. "Fire!" Hargrove roared. Smoke belched from the tree line. The first volley tore through the column. Men dropped, wagons lurched. Ellery fired, felt the musket kick his shoulder, rammed powder down the barrel with shaking hands, fired again. The world became a blur of noise and smoke, the tang of sulfur, the hiss of water churned to mud, the sharp smell of horse sweat. For a heartbeat, it seemed they would carry the day. The wagons faltered, men scattered, the river turned dark with trampled silt. Then, from the east, a trumpet cried. "Cavalry!" someone shouted. Through the fog, the gleam of sabers. British dragoons, more than a score of them, thundering down the riverbank, their green jackets bright even in the half-light. Hargrove did not hesitate. "Fall back! Into the pines, now!" The militia broke from their hiding place, dragging powder kegs and wounded alike. The ford erupted into shouting and splintering wood as the Loyalists tried to rally behind the fresh charge. Ellery stumbled over a root, nearly losing his musket. The wood swallowed them, branches whipping his face, the ground slick beneath his boots. Behind, the trumpet sounded again, closer this time. Cole caught his sleeve, dragging him onward. "Move, damn you! The trees will hide us!" And so they ran, not as soldiers, but as hunted men. By the time the sun cleared the pines, the militia had scattered across the lowlands, each man finding his own path through the tangled swamp. Ellery found himself with Cole and 4 others, their chests heaving, mud streaked to their knees. Somewhere behind, musket fire cracked, distant, then fading. "Did we take the wagons?" Ellery gasped. Cole shook his head, lips pressed thin. "Took what we could carry, left the rest for the crows." No one spoke for a while. The river hissed in the distance like a snake in its den. Hargrove reappeared at last, his coat torn, a bandage blooming red at his arm. He said nothing of victory or defeat, only raised his hand for silence. "We head deeper," he said. "They'll follow. They always follow." The men obeyed, because there was nothing else left to do. The swamp swallowed them whole. By nightfall, the trees grew thicker, their roots twisting like the bones of ancient beasts beneath the black water. Spanish moss hung in gray veils, dripping with the day's humidity. The air stank of rot and stillness, each breath heavy with the taste of iron and decay. Frogs croaked somewhere unseen. Insects hummed with a relentless persistence. The sound of pursuit was distant, but unending. The faint jingle of bridles, the snap of a branch, the low bark of a dog carried on the wet wind. "Do you hear that?" whispered Sergeant Cole, his voice a rasp, barely above the water's ripple. Thomas Ellery nodded, his hands tightened on the musket stock. They had marched since dawn with little food and less rest. Their boots sodden, their powder horns damp. Somewhere behind them, the British hunters moved like hounds on a cold trail. It was only a matter of time before the swamp betrayed them with a splash too loud or a cough that carried. Captain Hargrove raised a hand. "Keep moving. The night is our only ally now." Hours later, they found a hummock of dry ground beneath a canopy of twisted cypress. There, the militia gathered in a silent circle, their faces hollow in the pale glow of a shuttered lantern. A few gnawed on strips of smoked venison. Others simply stared into the darkness, their thoughts miles away. Ellery pulled the crumpled parchment from his coat once more. His fingers trembled as he set the quill to the page. "My dearest Mary," he wrote, "the war here is not fought with banners and brass. It is fought in the dark, in the mud, where men vanish as if the earth itself swallows them. Villages burn without warning. The night carries whispers we dare not follow. Yet I march still, because if we do not, there will be nothing left for you, nor for our boy." The ink bled where his hand shook. He paused, listening to the night. The distant splash of a heron, the hiss of reeds swaying in the breeze. "If this finds you," he added, "know that I have not forgotten the sound of home. It is what keeps me walking." He folded the letter, sealed it with the dregs of candle wax, and tucked it against his heart. He doubted it would ever leave this swamp. Mist rolled over the black water as the hour stretched toward dawn. It clung low to the ground, curling between roots and over the still surface of the pools. The men stirred uneasily, each hearing his own echo in the silence. Cole leaned close to Ellery. "Ever feel you're being watched?" "All night," Ellery murmured. Then came a sound, soft as breath, a whisper of movement through the trees. Shapes flickered at the edge of vision, pale, gaunt, and silent. Men swore they saw tattered coats, burned hems trailing in the water, faces pale as ash beneath the moonlight. One swore he heard a child's laugh, thin and hollow. Hargrove tightened his grip on his pistol. "Keep your powder dry," he ordered, though his voice wavered. Ellery peered into the mist. For a moment he saw it, the half-burned wooden horse from Greenwood, floating on the dark water, its charred wheel turning slowly with the current. He blinked, and it was gone. The night passed without a shot fired. At first light, the hunters' torches no longer glimmered on the horizon. Whether the British had turned back or lost the trail, no one could say. The swamp was silent again, save for the caw of distant crows. Hargrove gave the order to move north. They carried what little powder and food they had taken from the Loyalist wagons, their boots sucking at the mud with every step. The forest thinned by degrees, and with it, the oppressive weight of the mist. Yet none among them felt relief. Ellery marched at the rear, the letter heavy in his pocket. The image of that floating toy burned behind his eyes. "We made it," Cole muttered beside him. "Did we?" Ellery answered quietly. By the second day, the trees opened to reveal the faint ribbon of a road. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow long upon the clearing. Far to the north, a thin column of smoke coiled into the sky. Hargrove paused, squinting against the rising sun. "Another village," he said. No one asked whose it was, Patriot or Loyalist, for the smoke told the same story either way. The war rolled on, leaving nothing untouched. Ellery looked once more over his shoulder, toward the swamp that still whispered behind them. Something in that place lingered, something older than the war, older than men with muskets. Perhaps it was only fear. Perhaps it was something worse. "One day," he murmured, "we'll have to come back." And with that the column trudged on, their shadows long and thin upon the Carolina road.